Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today should have been putting new batteries into a Libretto CT50 battery pack. However, I ran into a minor issue with that, so while I'm waiting for the batteries to arrive, I thought I'd take us back to 2009 with this, the Sony Vaio P11Z. Now we've seen this a couple of times already, attempting to run Windows 10, various other options based on Windows 10, and a couple of Linux installs. So I thought I'd do a full factory reset so we could look at what it was like when it first arrived on the scene, have a look at the software involved, and see why it didn't become the runaway success that I think it should have been. However, I ran into more than a few minor issues attempting to do a reinstall on this, and so instead I thought I'd share with you some of my experiences and a few tips and tricks when it comes to reinstalling operating systems on old devices. Before we get started, I'd like to say a big thank you to all the new subscribers. I actually thought my Windows 98 video had done really well when it passed 2,000 views, and I have absolutely no idea what went on with the EM500 video as it passed 12,000 views within 7 days. This means two things. First of all, I have finally passed 4,000 subscribers, so thank you very much, and I really appreciate that. It's nice to feel like the channel is still growing. And the second thing is, this will provide some very interesting stats for my upcoming video on what monetization means for a small creator channel like this one. Let's look at a few options for factory restores and things you might need. When it comes to restoring old computers, there's a few things that come in handy time and time again. The first is an external optical drive. This is very useful for burning restore media and installation ISOs. A floppy drive is very useful if you're going to be dealing with either DOS or Windows 9X, and a bunch of USB sticks in order to make bootable media and transfer files once installations have been done, such as common software and drivers. In addition, an external drive bay can be extremely useful for formatting and cloning drives so that you've got those permanent backups. And finally, I would recommend having a working XP machine. Why Windows XP? Well, modern Windows really doesn't play well with floppy disks. Even with an external drive, it's very difficult to get Windows 10 to read or write floppy disks properly. And it's my opinion that XP sits at the perfect juncture of operating system and technology, because you can get an XP machine that not only has an optical drive, but also has a built-in floppy drive, and it can use USB sticks with ease, all on the same machine. Not only that, but on Windows XP, you can still get software for cloning, partitioning drives, and creating bootable media. And not only does it support more modern NTFS file systems, but Windows XP is just as happy with old FAT and FAT32 partitions. Add to that a lot of XP hardware will come with built-in serial port for connecting to those retro devices, and you can see why I think Windows XP sits at that perfect juncture. So let's take a look at some of the different methods for factory resetting. So many computers will have shipped with a factory reset partition on the hard drive, and this is the absolute best scenario when it comes to trying to factory reset a device, assuming of course your hard drive is still working. To access this restore media, all you need to do is reboot the computer and press the correct button. For most computers, it is F10 or F12, and this will bring up a boot menu, and you'll see a little option at the bottom that says recovery media or something similar. Selecting this will do a completely clean install of both the operating system, the drivers needed, and any of the bloatware that the manufacturer shipped with it. If you're using something like the Viliv S5 or the Samsung Q1, there'll be an alternative way of accessing this menu. On the Viliv S5, for example, you boot it up and you just press the jog key, and this will bring up the correct menu. The other big advantage of doing it this way is that usually, because it's a factory reset, the operating system will automatically be activated, so no annoying pop-ups, and it's not going to stop working and lock you out after 30 days. Of course, this method won't work if you've had a hard drive failure, so another backup option like a drive clone or some restore disks is an excellent idea to have. If you are lucky enough to have an actual set of physical restore disks in your box with your device, then this is an easy option and you're going to have no issues reinstalling the whole system. A little bit like using a restore partition, all you need to do is make sure the boot setup is in the correct order and then pop those optical disks into a drive, internal or external, and boot the system. After that, it'll usually just run completely unassisted until everything is back to normal. Of course, either of these first two methods, you're going to lose all the data on your drive, so make sure you've backed that up first. So what if you don't have a restore partition or a set of restore disks? Well, the Internet Archive is going to be your friend. The Internet Archive has a wealth of software and uploads and music and books and saved web pages and all manner of other things. And if you are lucky, then some kind soul will have uploaded some OEM disks for you to restore your system from, like these for the P11Z. Once you've downloaded those ISOs, you can then use something like Image Burn to write them to a CD or DVD, old school, or if you're a little bit more modern and you want to use a USB installer, then you'll want something like Rufus. This allows you to convert those ISOs into a bootable USB. If you're using Rufus, if it's an older system, pre-2010 or thereabouts, you're going to want to set the partition scheme to MBR. If it's after 2010 or thereabouts, depending exactly on your BIOS, then you're going to want the GPT structure. Once that's done, plug it in, go ahead and restore your system. So as you may have guessed already, although I downloaded those restore disks, they didn't like my P11Z. I actually wrote them to DVDs as it happens. I kept getting this error message, and I think the reason I'm getting the error message is because it doesn't recognize the system, because the drive in here has been swapped from a mechanical hard drive, it would have been a 60 gig drive in this particular model, to a 64 gig SSD. So because of that, it doesn't match the original spec, and so the software doesn't believe that it should be installed on here. Honestly, this has been really annoying, and it gets worse. So you don't have a recovery partition, you don't have any restore disks, you've been on the Internet Archive, had a hunt around, drawn a blank, and the only thing you can find is a dodgy disk on eBay for more money than your computer is worth. What should you do next? At this point, it's best just to create a clean install of the operating system and worry about drivers and add-on software later. And this is what I've done for a number of computers, including my UMID MBook, the Viliv S5, my P1610, to name a few. And this is also what I've done for the P11Z. When it comes to finding an ISO to do a clean install from, you do need to be a little bit careful. If you're ME or earlier, then I would suggest you head over to WinWorld. This has a library of old operating systems with various versions that you can download and write to floppy disks, CDs or DVDs, depending on which operating system you're after. For installations of Windows 95 or earlier, you are going to need a floppy disk drive, as you're going to need to be able to make a bootable floppy, since these operating systems have little or no USB support whatsoever, and you probably don't have an optical drive on it. And even if you have an optical drive on it, you still need a bootable floppy to start the installation process. The exception of this is you can actually use the Windows 98 2nd Edition bootable CD to start the installation process and then swap to the Windows 95 floppy disks or CD. But honestly, it's just easier to boot it from a floppy. From Windows 98 2nd Edition onward, bootable CDs and DVDs are the order of the day. Again, you'll need to convert those ISOs into a usable DVD using something like Image Burn. After Windows 98, depending on your BIOS, you may be able to boot to USB, and from there on in, it becomes very easy to make a bootable USB and do a clean install. So I reinstalled Vista on here using a bootable USB. There is one small issue that you're likely to come across, and that is that if there's a more recent version of Windows on your computer, it often won't let you do an install of an earlier version. So for example, if you've got a netbook and somebody's installed install Windows 7 on it, you can't put your installer in for Windows XP and expect it to work. Instead, it'll simply bypass the USB installation media and boot straight to Windows 7 because Windows 7 is newer. There's a few different ways to get around this. You can use FreeDOS to create a bootable CD or bootable USB, and in fact this is a functionality that's built into Rufus anyway, so if you've got USB support, this is a very easy thing to do. Boot into DOS and then simply erase the whole file system. After that, put your recovery media in and you're away. Alternatively, if you don't want to use DOS, you could always download an old version of Linux and install that. It doesn't take long to install. Once it's installed over Windows, you'll have no issues and you can boot up from your installation media. Finally, if all that fails, there is the option that you simply pull the drive out, pop it in an external drive bay and reformat the drive so you can start fresh. And while that might sound a little extreme, there are several computers where I've had to do that, including on my Dialog Flybook, which somebody had put Windows 7 on and it absolutely refused to boot using the external CD drive because it drew too much power. And it wouldn't let me boot to FreeDOS as it's not an x86 CPU. Instead, it has one of the transmuter Crusoes, which we see a lot in Sony's picture books. In another example, I was struggling to install Windows 95 on my Libretto CT50 using the floppy disks that I've got. I believe a couple of them must be corrupt, but in the end, I simply took the drive out of the Libretto, popped it in another Windows 95 machine which has an optical drive, installed Windows 95, and then just put the drive back in the Libretto to finish the installation. The point I'm trying to make here is that no matter how difficult it seems, there is always a way. If you're looking for an operating system later than ME, then looking for ISOs can become a little tricky. First of all, if Microsoft still has it on their site, that is the best place to get it, as you know it's completely legitimate. If not, then it's back to the Internet Archive. However, downloading an ISO from anywhere except Microsoft runs some risks. It's quite likely that the ISO has been tinkered with. Now don't get me wrong, sometimes these ISOs have been tinkered with in a beneficial way, so it might automatically activate the OS, for example, or it might come bundled with a bunch of extra software that you're going to want, such as Firefox browser or PDF readers, etc, etc. It might even have a driver compilation and automatically install drivers for you. If that's the case, that is wonderful. However, there is a dark side, and some of these come with built-in viruses and data miners and crypto miners and things like that. Honestly, if there's a crypto miner and they've installed it on this, they're not going to get very far, as one, I don't intend to put it online for very long, if at all, and two, this has terrible hardware specs, so you're not going to get any crypto out of that. That said, I would have been much happier if I could have downloaded Vista from Microsoft, or if the OEM discs I found on the Internet Archive had actually worked. It turns out when I was doing a reinstall on my P1610 that one of the most elusive operating systems out there is Windows XP Tablet Edition 2005. When you find ISOs of this online, it is usually Windows XP Pro and is often even missing the bits that turn it into a tablet PC. This has been very frustrating. However, I did end up managing to find a seemingly legitimate Windows XP tablet ISO, which has worked very well. And last year when I did the restore, I even activated it by phoning Microsoft, which I thought was very nice of them to still support that. Now comes the next issue, drivers. And if you've seen my video on the Viliv S5, you'll know that it can be very difficult to find the correct drivers for some machines, especially if you're going back a bit. So Windows 95 and 98, again, very difficult to find drivers. As for the P11Z, while the restore disks wouldn't allow me to do a clean install, once I'd got Windows Vista back on here, it did thankfully allow me to reinstall all the drivers. So everything everything on here is currently working as it should. What it didn't allow me to do though was reinstall any of the bundled software with ease. So if you're looking for drivers, the first place I would start is the manufacturer's website. Some manufacturers like Fujitsu still maintain a full driver support package on their website. So it's possible for the P1610 and my newly acquired P1620, which we'll look at some point in the near future, to download a full set of drivers and additional software that's required for these. Sadly, some manufacturers like Toshiba and Sony no longer have any drivers on their websites, which can be a real pain. It's not really a surprise though, since Sony left the PC market back in 2014 and Toshiba in 2018. So failing the manufacturer's website, the next place I would have a look is the Internet Archive. Again, you may be lucky and some kind soul has uploaded a complete set of drivers for your computer. This is what I found with the CT50 and again with my Compaq Armada M300. And if somebody has done this, it really takes the pain out of trying to find those drivers. If the Internet Archive fails on that, then it's off to the chipset manufacturers. So look for your chipset drivers, sound drivers, display drivers, etc, etc. For other components, if you're not happy with the Windows default drivers, then it's into the device manager and start Googling those serial numbers. You can also use Bing, I guess. The hope is you're going to find a suitable driver download, but to be honest, it's quite tricky, and a lot of the time you'll end up clicking something you didn't mean to and downloading some kind of spyware that you really don't want on your system. The other option, if you've got a relatively modern system, is to try an automatic driver installer like this one. So I've used this one in the past and it's been very effective at finding all the drivers for Windows 8, 7 and even XP. I did find that it wasn't so great with Bluetooth drivers and got occasional sound issues, but nothing that couldn't be easily resolved. You just have to be a little careful when using a service like this, because we all know services are not free, and so it is going to try and download other software, so just be careful what you're clicking when using an installer program like this. Finally, in order to get that factory reset complete, you're going to need to reinstall the OEM software that came with it. In the case of this VAIO, it came with the cross-media bar, which allowed an instant boot for quick browsing and media use without booting into Vista. Sadly, if the software isn't available on the manufacturer's website and you've already been on the Internet Archive and it isn't there, then you're going to have to spend hours searching through the Internet Archive's web pages in order to see if you can find a copy of the software in there. This takes a lot of time. It is what I did with the Viliv S5, and while I got most of the software I needed, I never did get the Cube UI working in English. The only other option is to get lucky and be able to snag one of those OEM discs off eBay. Should you manage to do this, do everyone a favor and put a copy on the Internet Archive so that we can all access it in the future. On the P11Z, I did manage to get some of the VAIO, but not all of the VAIO software reinstalled. It involved putting disk 1 in and then disk 2 and then disk 1 and then disk 2 and restarting the computer over and over again because it didn't want to do more than a couple of bits of software at a time without faulting. I fear this is as close as I'm going to get to a factory reset, which is a real shame. However, it's not going to stop me doing a video on Windows Vista on here, and I'm certainly going to put Windows XP on it at some point and use my MBook video drivers because they worked very well on the Viliv S5. For most PCs, the OEM software is usually just bloat, and so it's nothing to cry about should you not be able to get it. The methods we've discussed already will allow you to get a working operating system installed in a couple of hours, along with most, if not all, of the drivers required. It is a shame I can't get the cross-media bar to work on here, and nor can I get the magnifier button to work properly. But it is what it is. So a couple of things that are worth knowing if you have a collection of retro computers like myself. The first is, from Windows XP onwards, within the operating system, you can create a recovery partition on the same drive or on a second drive in the machine. Given the age of an XP drive, and particularly if you're using an old PARTA drive as opposed to the newer SATA standard, then the risk of a drive fault is increasing significantly with time. And so a full set of restore disks are worth creating. So once you've done a clean install, again from XP onwards, you can write a bunch of DVDs that will restore the system to where it is now. Better yet, why not simply keep a clone of the drive itself? This allows a really quick reinstallation as you simply clone it to a new drive or reclone it to the original drive depending on the situation. Cloning applications like Aomi Backupper are not expensive and they work from XP onwards. So if you've got one of these newer machines, you don't even need to take the drive out to clone it. Simply put the software on, plug in an external drive, and you're away. After that, your cloned image can simply be archived for later use. Better yet, Aomi allows you to create bootable media, which will allow you to simply plug that external drive back in and fully restore the system in as little as 20 minutes, depending on your drive speeds. It might sound a little bit like I've been complaining about the difficulties that come with restoring these old operating systems, but in actual fact, I really enjoy the challenge of trying to find all those drivers and the tinkering and the messing about that comes with it. It also brings a degree of authenticity to retro computing and offers a window into what things were like at the time. If you have stories, good or bad, about trying to reinstall operating systems, I have more than a few, or you know some of the methods or tricks or tips that I've not discussed, for example, I've not even mentioned using virtual machines, then pop a comment below. As always, I try and respond to every comment I get. If you have enjoyed this video or found it useful, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell so that you can see the upcoming video on this, or the upcoming video on rebuilding a Libretto battery pack, or many of the other videos that will be coming this way shortly. A huge thanks goes to all the viewers, commenters, subscribers, and especially to the members who directly support the channel. As always, my name's Hugh, this is Handheld Computing, thanks for watching.